My name is Claire Whitfield, and the worst moment of my life didn't happen in a hospital, or at a graveside, or in any of the places people usually associate with devastation. It happened in a kitchen. My mother's kitchen. The one I had cleaned, restocked, and sat in for 3 years while my younger brother lived 2 states away, building what everyone kept calling his incredible life. I had given up my graduate school acceptance to stay. That part matters. Northwestern had offered me a spot in their nursing administration program. Full funding. I had the letter in a drawer somewhere, still crisp, still real. I had deferred once, then again, then let it expire quietly. The way you let things expire when you tell yourself it's temporary, and then one day realize temporary has become your entire life. My mother's diagnosis came this spring. I turned 27. Early onset Parkinson's. Not a death sentence, the neurologist said, but a long road requiring consistent support. My brother Marcus had called from Portland, voice sympathetic, schedule impossible. He was launching a company. He had investors. He had a fiancée named Brooke who posted aesthetic pictures of their apartment on Instagram with captions about intentional living. So, I stayed. 3 years of medication management, physical therapy appointments, grocery runs at 6 in the morning when the store was quiet enough that my mother didn't get overwhelmed by sound. 3 years of learning to read the tremor in her hands the way sailors read weather. I didn't resent it. That's the part people never believe, but it's true. I loved my mother clearly and without condition. The resentment came later, and it came from a different direction entirely. Marcus visited 4 times in 3 years. Each time he arrived like a weather event. Loud, warm, disruptive, briefly radiant. He brought expensive wine and told stories about funding rounds and conferences in cities I had stopped imagining myself in. My mother lit up for him the way she always had. He was charming in the way people are charming when they don't have to maintain it daily. I watched from the doorway sometimes, holding her evening medication in a small paper cup, and I felt something I couldn't name that I now understand was erasure. The morning everything changed. Marcus had arrived the night before for what I thought was a routine visit. He'd been different this time. Quieter. He'd sat with Mom longer than usual, in her room with the door closed. I hadn't thought much of it. The attorney arrived at 9. I remember the sound of his car in the driveway, the particular crunch of new tires on old gravel. Richard Alton. Estate planning. He had a soft voice and a hard briefcase and the specific kind of practiced neutrality that people develop when they routinely deliver news that rearranges families. I came downstairs in a sweatshirt I'd slept in. Marcus was already at the kitchen table, dressed, coffee in front of him, expression arranged into something careful. Mom sat at the head of the table in her good chair, the one with the arms she could grip when the tremors came. She looked at me when I entered and something moved behind her eyes that I didn't understand yet. I sat down. Richard Alton opened his briefcase. He explained that my mother had updated her estate documents 6 weeks earlier. He explained this gently, which is how I knew it would be bad. Good news doesn't require gentleness. The house, he said, primary residence and property, 3 acres, had been designated to Marcus. I heard it. I understood each word individually. But the combination took a moment to assemble into meaning. To me, my mother had left her medical equipment, personal effects, and the contents of the storage unit on Delray Road. A storage unit I had never heard her mention. Not once in 3 years. The room stayed quiet for too long. Marcus cleared his throat. He didn't look at me directly. "Mom," he said, "are you sure you want to do this right now?" It was the first time I understood that he had known. He had known before he arrived. That's why the visit had felt different. That's why the door had been closed. I looked at my mother. She met my gaze for a long moment. Her expression was complex in a way I couldn't read, and I had learned to read her better than anyone. Then she looked down at her hands, folded carefully in her lap. "Claire," she said quietly, "you'll understand eventually." I want to say I responded with grace. I didn't. I stood up and walked out of the kitchen, through the back door, and stood in the yard in my sleeping clothes in the November cold until I was sure I could breathe without my voice breaking. The oak tree at the edge of the property was bare. A bird sat on the fence post and regarded me with complete indifference. I stared back at it for a long time. When I went back inside, Richard Alton was gone. Marcus was rinsing his coffee cup. He turned when I entered. "Claire, don't. I know how this looks. Do you?" He set the mug down carefully. "It's not like you think. There are reasons. Mom has reasons. Then she can explain them. She doesn't want conflict." I laughed. It came out wrong. Short and flat. "She doesn't want conflict. I spent 3 years here, Marcus. I gave up Northwestern. I managed her care plan. I learned every single medication interaction and every symptom progression and every technique the physical therapist showed me because I did every session with her. And you flew in 4 times. 4. And somehow you're getting the house." His jaw moved. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "You chose to stay," he said. "Nobody forced you." That landed the way he meant it to. Clean and precise and designed to reframe sacrifice as preference. "You chose to leave," I said. "Nobody forced you either." He didn't answer that. I packed a bag that afternoon. Not everything, just enough. I told my mother I needed a few days. She nodded without arguing, which told me she had expected this, which made it worse. I kissed her forehead because I loved her even then, even through the confusion and the hurt, because love and anger are not mutually exclusive, and anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't been tested properly. The storage unit on Delray Road was 40 minutes away, a low industrial complex behind a tire repair shop, orange doors numbered in peeling adhesive. Unit 114. The key had been included in the estate packet in a small paper envelope with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. I drove there the same evening. The parking lot was empty except for one truck, engine idling, driver asleep. The light above Unit 114 flickered when I approached. The key turned smoothly. The door rolled up with a sound like a slow exhale. Inside, I stood still. It was organized. That was the first thing. Not the chaos of things simply stored, but the deliberate order of things preserved. Shelving units lined both walls. Labeled boxes, archival quality, the kind you buy when you intend something to last. A small reading lamp sat on a folding table plugged into the single outlet as though someone had spent time in here, as though someone had come here to think. My mother. The realization arrived slowly, then completely. I stepped inside and pulled the door down behind me. The lamp clicked on when I found the switch. Warm light spread across years of careful documentation. I moved along the shelves slowly, reading labels, financial records going back decades, property documents, correspondence files, and then, near the back wall, a section that made my breath catch. Journals. A full shelf. My mother's handwriting on each spine, marked by year. Beside them, a fireproof box, gray metal. A combination lock with a note taped to it. The note said, "Claire, 0311, your birthday." My hands were steady when I opened it. I don't know why. Everything else in me was not. Inside, a sealed envelope, a smaller journal bound in dark blue cloth, a set of documents in a clear plastic sleeve, and a folded piece of notepaper on top of everything else. I unfolded the note first. My handwriting has been worse lately, so I wrote this on a good morning. If you're reading this here, then you did what I thought you would do. You didn't fall apart. You came to find out why. I pressed my hand flat against the table. I owe you the truth about several things. This is the first. The house was never the asset I wanted to give you. The house is Marcus's problem now. He doesn't know that yet. You do. I opened the sealed envelope. The documents inside were not what I expected. Not cash, not simple savings. My mother had spent 20 years working as a medical billing consultant before her diagnosis, long before I was aware of what that work actually meant. She had been meticulous, methodical, and she had invested quietly, independently in a way that her financial advisor described in the accompanying letter as unusual discipline for a sole earner, a trust, established 11 years ago. structured to activate upon the completion of specific conditions, conditions that referenced in precise legal language, demonstrated caregiving responsibility for a dependent family member for a period of no less than 30 months, 3 years, almost to the day. I sat down on the concrete floor. The trust held the kind of value that doesn't announce itself, not spectacular, not cinematic, but enough to return to something. Enough to rebuild from a real foundation rather than an improvised one. Enough to matter. I opened the small blue journal. The first entry was dated the month after my mother's diagnosis. I began reading and did not stop for 2 hours. She had written about watching me change my plans. She had written about the guilt of accepting it. She had written, repeatedly, about the difference between what Marcus needed and what I needed, and how those things had never been the same. She had written, Marcus needs to be given things or he believes he isn't loved. Claire needs to be trusted. I hope I have found the right way to do both. The house was Marcus's gift. The trust was mine. The house was visible and immediate and would feel like winning to someone who measured in those terms. The trust was invisible and conditional and required exactly the kind of patience and commitment I had already demonstrated. She had designed it that way. Precisely and deliberately and with a clarity that made my chest ache. I drove back toward town slowly. The highway was quiet. I kept both hands on the wheel and didn't turn on the radio because I needed to think without interruption. By the time I reached the motel where I'd booked a room, I had a shape forming in my mind. Not anger, not vengeance. Something colder and more useful, understanding. And with understanding, direction. I didn't contact Marcus the next morning. Or the one after that. I contacted a financial advisor first. Then a trust attorney named Patricia Wells, whose office was wood paneling and afternoon light and a directness I found immediately useful. She reviewed the documents, asked 3 precise questions, and told me the trust was airtight and executable at my direction. Then she said, with the careful neutrality of someone who had seen this before, your mother was protecting you from a process she believed you would lose if you fought it directly. I thought about that for a long time. Then I drove back to the house. My mother's house. Marcus's house now, technically. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the front window. A light was on inside. 2 shadows visible. Marcus and Brooke had been staying there, making themselves at home with a speed that told me they had planned this visit as a transition, not a visit. I rang the doorbell of my own home. Brooke answered. She had that particular smile that people wear when they're trying to appear warmer than they feel. Claire, we didn't know you were stopping by. I'd like to see Marcus. Of course. She stepped back. Her eyes moved to my bag, then away. She was calculating. I could see it. Marcus came from the kitchen, a dish towel over one shoulder. He looked for just a moment, relieved that I appeared calm. That was a mistake on his part. We need to talk, I said. We sat in the living room. The furniture had been subtly rearranged, small things, a chair moved, a lamp replaced. Not dramatic, but present. The kind of changes that say we live here now. I'm not here to fight about the house, I said. His shoulders dropped slightly. I found the storage unit. He went still. I want you to know that I understand what Mom did. I think she was right to do it the way she did it. I think she knew you well enough to understand that if the trust had been disclosed, you would have found a way to challenge it or complicate it or bring in someone to reframe it as unfair, so she made it simple for you and real for me. Marcus set down his coffee cup. His expression had shifted from relief into something harder to read. There's a trust, I said. I won't tell you the details because they aren't yours. What I will tell you is that I'm moving forward, and I'd prefer to do it without a legal dispute that drains time and money from both of us. He looked at me. You're serious. Very. Brooke had appeared in the doorway. Her expression had sharpened significantly. You can have the house, I continued. Mom gave it to you. And I'm not contesting that, but I need 2 weeks to collect everything that belongs to me. Personal items, medical documentation, caregiving records. I'll be out of your way. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what exactly is in this trust? I stood up. That's not information I'm sharing. Claire. I picked up my bag. I'll be back Saturday for my things. I'd appreciate it if you were here. I left before he could respond. Patricia moved quickly once I confirmed the direction I wanted to take. The trust activation required documentation I had kept for other reasons: care logs, pharmacy records, appointment histories, mileage records from 3 years of driving my mother to every therapy session. I had kept them out of habit, the habit of someone who learned early that systems work better with paper trails. My mother had known I would have them. She had planned around my competence rather than hoping for it. That distinction meant everything. 2 weeks later, I had secured a lease on a small apartment on the north side of town. Not beautiful, but mine. I had re-enrolled for a spring information session at a nursing administration program in Chicago. Different school, same field, same door that had been waiting 3 years for me to walk back through it. I had also been in contact with a community care coordinator, Jean Abrams, who ran a nonprofit focused on supporting family caregivers, people doing exactly what I had done, without resources, without recognition, without a system designed to see them. I told Jean I had some funding available. I told her I wanted to help build something practical. She called me back within an hour. Marcus called twice during that period. I answered once. He wanted to know if there was anything he should know about the house, financially, structurally. It was not a question about me. I told him the roof had a soft spot above the back guest room and that the HVAC filter needed replacing every 8 weeks. He said thank you in the voice of someone expecting more. I said goodbye and ended the call. My mother had a better week the following Thursday. I visited in the afternoon when Marcus was out. We sat in a backyard in the thin December sun, her hands wrapped around a mug, mine around another. The oak tree at the property edge was still bare. We didn't talk about the estate. We didn't talk about the estate. We didn't talk about Marcus. We talked about a documentary she had watched and a book she was thinking about, and whether the birds that came to the feeder were the same ones every year or different ones she was just recognizing as familiar. At one point she said simply, "You came back." I said, "I always come back." She nodded, eyes forward. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." I didn't need her to. She had said it in a storage unit on Delray Road in neat handwriting on a good morning, months before this moment arrived. She had trusted me to find it in the right order. She had been correct. I didn't become bitter. I want to say that clearly because it matters. Bitterness is a thing that grows when you water it with repetition. When you tell the story of your injury so many times, it becomes your identity. I told the story once to Patricia for legal documentation. I told it once more to Jean for context. And then I let the story finish and began a different one. By spring, the caregiver support program had its first 8 participants. We met on Tuesday evenings in a community center with bad lighting and excellent coffee and the specific atmosphere of people who were tired but not broken. I facilitated. I was not a therapist or a social worker. I was someone who had done the work and survived it and found, on the other side, that surviving it was actually worth something transferable. Marcus sold the house 14 months later. The market had shifted. The roof repair cost more than anticipated. He and Brooke had decided Portland suited them better. I found out from my mother, who mentioned it in the same tone she used for most information, as a fact, not a verdict. I wasn't glad and I wasn't sad. I was not much of anything about it. The house had been a house. What it held, the years of ordinary devotion, the kitchen mornings, the medication schedules, the quiet evenings watching my mother's favorite programs in the blue television light, none of that had ever lived in the walls. It had lived in what I chose to do inside them. You don't deed that in a will. You don't reassign it to someone who was elsewhere. I got a card from Marcus at Christmas that year. Brief, careful, signed with both their names. I sent one back. Brief and genuine. Because whatever he had done and whatever our mother had decided and whatever I had felt standing in that yard in November cold, he was still my brother. And some threads survive the cutting if you don't pull them all the way through. My mother had been right about one thing she wrote in that journal, near the end of an entry I've read more times than I'll admit. Some people need what they can see, and some people can be trusted with what's buried. She had sorted her daughters and her son by that understanding. She had been, as she usually was, about the things that mattered. Correct. The storage unit lease expired in March. I emptied it carefully, returned the lamp, swept the floor clean. Before I pulled the door down for the last time, I stood in the empty space for a moment. Concrete and fluorescent quiet, and the faint smell of cardboard and dust, and the specific absence of everything that had once made it mean something. Then I left. The door rolled down behind me with a sound like a long, final exhale, and I drove north into the beginning of everything I had already earned. If this story stayed with you or reminded you of something you've been carrying longer than you should have to, take a moment. Leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear that quiet endurance is not the same as losing. And if you want more stories about the kind of strength that doesn't make noise, subscribe. We'll be here. I've thought a lot about what my mother understood that I didn't, at least not at first. She had watched two of her children live their lives, and she had drawn conclusions that she never announced out loud. She didn't sit either of us down and explain her reasoning. She didn't deliver a speech about values or responsibility or what it means to show up for someone when it costs you something real. She simply built a structure around what she had already observed, and then she waited to see if she had read us correctly. She had. That's the part that stays with me. Not the trust, not the money, not the apartment or the program in Chicago or any of the practical things that came after. What stays with me is the precision of her faith. She had looked at me clearly without sentimentality and decided I was the kind of person who could be trusted with something invisible, something that required patience and follow-through and the willingness to act without an audience. She didn't give me that quality. I had built it myself, slowly, across years of ordinary days that nobody was watching and nobody was applauding. She just recognized it and designed around it. Marcus needed the house because he needed to feel chosen. I understand that now without bitterness. Some people measure love in what they can hold and show and point to. That's not a character flaw so much as it is a shape, the shape of what someone becomes when visibility becomes the primary currency of their emotional world. He wasn't cruel on purpose. He was just someone who had learned to look outward for proof of his worth. And when you do that long enough, inward evidence stops feeling real. I had learned something different. 3 years of caregiving teaches you that the most important work is almost never witnessed. Nobody hands you a certificate for knowing which medication makes your mother dizzy if she takes it on an empty stomach. Nobody marks your file when you notice the slight change in her gait that signals a rough week ahead. That knowledge lives between you and the person you're caring for, and when they're gone, it lives only in you. That's not a loss. That's a kind of intimacy that outlasts everything else. What I've come to believe is this: the way we respond to difficulty when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed is the truest version of who we are. Not our best moments, which are easy to perform, and not our worst, which anyone can have. The truest version lives in the sustained and unwitnessed middle, in the choice to show up again on a Tuesday morning when it's hard and unremarkable and no one is keeping score. Claire didn't get justice because the universe intervened on her behalf. She got it because her mother had watched her make that choice over and over for 3 years and had built something around it that no one could take away. The cause was the character. The effect was the outcome. It was never more complicated than that. If you're in the middle of something invisible right now, something that costs you and doesn't yet show, I want you to hear this: what you're building is real, even when it can't be seen. Especially then.